Mr. Harvey Tattersall, and dedicated to his profession. A man's man, a worker of people, a family man, a father of 2 children, Harvey Jr. and Florence. I came into Harvey's knowing in 1950 when he was a handicapper at the midget races at Century Stadium. If anybody remembers the Century Stadium on Memorial Avenue, which was an old dump. First it was a dog track, and then it was a racetrack, and finally a shopping center. Harvey took to me, or I took to Harvey, in 1950 at Century, and I ran for him. And then he gave me a job at Riverside. Hauling cars. And from that, he made me a assistant starter, and then a starter. And he's the greatest fellow. He took more from all these drivers. He gave more to the eastern part of this country, in the eastern states, to stock car racing. If everybody remembers, you had one carburetor, locked up the rear end, and you were gone. You were a stock car driver. Well, that went on and on. Now, Harvey was also in midget racing himself. He was a stock car race driver. He ran a school in Long Island teaching drivers. He ran a school for stock car drivers teaching the safety of the stock car field. He had a hard time working with all the promoters. Now, just to give you an idea, I worked with Harvey, we worked together. I started Riverside on a Saturday. Sunday I would do Stafford Springs with Harvey on my back and get the feature going and leave and go to Tinty's place. I forget the name of it. In what? Plainville. And I'd come back Monday and I'd go to Manance up in Troy, do that show. And then Tuesday I'd be back doing jalopies and Harvey pushing on me. And Wednesday I'd go somewhere in Connecticut, Savin Rock, Bridgeport, and Friday, Bridgeport, and then back to Riverside. I did this for 22 weeks for 10 years. And I've met a lot of nice people through Harvey, and I've been proud to meet all you people. A lot of the people are strange faces to me. I'm getting a little older. I just passed my 75th birthday. And it's been 48 years that this goes back to. Harvey has been a great friend of everybody that I know. If he didn't like you the first day, he likes you the second. He's been a great man, and his family's been good to me, and all racing has been good to me. Thank you very much.
Hey,
Hang a little fun.
that's the one you take back too.
I used to bounce these 2 children on my knees. Believe it? Here, hold it up like this.
There we go. Try it again. Well, I've known Paul I've known Paul for an awfully long time. I can't remember a time I didn't know Paul. You know, I was sort of a racetrack brat, grew up around the racetracks back in the midget tracks in the after the Second World War in the late 40s, and then around the stock car tracks later on. And it seems to me that Paul has always been a fixture. He's always been a person that we looked up to. He was a very successful man in his own right, and I know he ran one hell of a race as a starter. I'd like to thank the New Year organization, its members and its directors, Al Feeney and Kathy and Don Cody in particular for pulling this event together. I worked in the automobile racing business for over 20 years myself and put on a lot of banquets such as this. And I know the anxiety that goes into organizing it and staging it. I know the anxiety that goes on about a week before the event, and you've only got about 25% of the tickets sold. They did a tremendous job they've packed the place. They went around the country to get people from far and wide to attend, including myself. So I think they need a real round of applause once again. I want you to know that I did not bring this up, but I happened to be at Westboro Speedway on that fateful night when our MCs decided to come and pay for my parking lot. The automobile racing business is known as a fraternity, and that's because we all sort of exist in the same environment. And just as there are rivalries between car owners and drivers on the track, there are rivalries among neighboring racetracks. Well, my dad was running Riverside Speedway that season, and I was running the Waterford Speed Bowl. And my grandmother, who had been in automobile racing for years and years, came up to me and said, "Oh, the cops just got some kid papering the parking lot with flyers for Stafford Speedway." I'm in the meeting, being the racing director in the middle of all this. I said, "Well, you know, just take care of it." He said, "No, you better come out." So I went out there, and who do the cops have? Mike Joy and this guy. Well, justice is swift. The cops asked me, "Well, what are you going to do about the situation?" I said, "Well, they didn't ask for permission to paper the parking lot. I'll tell you what, why don't you just have them take the paper off and let it go." So they may have been arrested, but they still have a clean criminal record because we didn't press charges that night. But you know, we're very honored to have our father honored by this organization and to be remembered by the auto racing fraternity. I think the new organization has done a very important thing in not only informing itself and running itself successfully for 15 years, but also to have this inaugural Hall of Fame event and to honor the people that basically brought us to this point in time. My dad was not the first person in automobile racing. His father was. My dad started off in the 30s as a race fan. My grandfather and grandmother dragged him around to the old dirt tracks and the old wooden board tracks in Long Island and in New Jersey. They got active in open cockpit racing. They were members of the officials, I suppose, of the Old American Racing Drivers Association, were handicappers. My grandfather was secretary of the organization, and they ran, you know, their business, their end of the business from the bottom up, learning it the hard way. They came in from the bottom and they worked their way up. My dad dropped out of college to go racing with his father. He built and owned open cockpit race cars. In the early days, he did some racing as well. He used to say that this was back in the days of the two-man race cars, so you can imagine how far back it goes. But, you know, with the advent of the Second World War, automobile racing came to a stop. We needed the manpower, the materials to go to war. But after the Second World War was over, racing came back with a slam. At that time, he was with the American Racing Drivers Association. He had 3 divisions, and they were racing 8 days a week in all 3 divisions, different racetracks. 8 days a week, how could that be? Well, they raced Monday through Sunday, and on Sunday they had a matinee and they had an evening show. There's a lot of stories about auto racing, and I've heard a lot of them over the years, but one of the things that my family brought forward, and in particular my father, was a lot of the stories about the promoters in the old days when things weren't right. You know, they grab the purse and they'd take off during the main event. And the race drivers and the car owners would, at the end of the event, you know, look for some money and they'd be gone. Back in the bad old days, before we had racing insurance to cover the drivers and the car owners, they began a hospital fund where they would take up collections at every race. Part of the back gate fees would go to a fund that would help out injured drivers and their families. A lot of the things he learned back in those days, he brought forward in the latter part of the 40s when midget races started to die out and stock car racing came in. He was one heck of a role model for my sister and myself. he brought certain principles into the business, you know, giving the guys a fair shake. He understood from his prior experiences that it was important that everybody share in the financial benefits as well as the burdens that automobile racing had to offer. He knew that the guys would race for almost nothing if there was almost nothing in the grandstand. He also knew that if it was a payday in the grandstand, everybody should share. So one of his principles was that the car owners and drivers should get a fair percentage of the attendance, and his figure was 40%. And from my growing up in the business and knowing a lot of the people in this room and people that aren't here, I know that was true. There was sort of a partnership that took place between my father and the car owners and drivers that raced with him. Those principles, I think, has made automobile racing in New England and throughout the country what it is today. My father wasn't a Lone Ranger. He happened to be in New England. We like to think of him as being the person who brought stock car racing into New England. I know he was instrumental in doing that. One thing that he was involved with that many of you may not know, he had what we believe to be the first live televised racing program out of New Jersey and out of some of the indoor coliseums in New York City on Channel 13 in New York back in 1949, 1950. My father was only one of a whole raft of people. They're drivers, they're car owners, they're mechanics, they're spectators, they're promoters that have brought automobile racing back from the old days with two modern race cars on dirt tracks and high bank board tracks, no seat belts, maybe a linen helmet, to what it is today, which is one of the most exciting and really one of the safest sports in the world. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm very proud to accept this award on his behalf. Thank you.
We'll ask you now to post it on the Hall of Fame. You know, I think it's a fitting tribute. Ask anybody in life. There are very few people in life that are remembered solely by their first name. And in the world of motorsports, when you mention the word Harvey, it was never necessary to say Tattersall. Anybody that was around racing and anybody that respected racing knew that Harvey was Tattersall.